So this next panel that we've organized is kind of an opportunity for some of our voluntary groups to share with others successes that they've had. I think as we run this event over the years, it's become clear that we have here and in our portfolio of voluntary groups, people who are organizations which are really big and have lots of money and have been going for 30, 40, 50 years, organizations which are small and maybe mom and pop shops working at a kitchen table, and organizations that started out that way and are now quite significant in size. And so with the planning committee, we thought it would be really good to illustrate, to allow voluntary groups who have real success stories to talk about what those successes were and what they think were the secrets or strategies that they used. And I know from a pre-call that not only will we hear positive stuff, but we'll also hear some cases where maybe there were lessons learned and the organization might do it a little bit differently the next time. So my panelists today are Susan Axelrod, the chair and founder of Citizens United for Research in Epilepsy Cure. She's received many awards recognizing her leadership from Research America, Child Neurology Foundation, the American Epilepsy Society, and she served on our advisory council for 4 years, and we were delighted to have her do that. Susan Dickinson has been the executive director of the Association for Frontotemporal Dementia, AFTD, since 2008. Under her leadership, the organization has tripled in size, and she has helped establish programs that stimulate development of therapies for FTD, expand information and support, and educate healthcare professionals about this rare disease. There's more than just Alzheimer's disease that we need to be thinking about. Amy Comstock-Rick is the Chief Executive Officer of Parkinson's Action Network. She also served as the president of CAMR, the Coalition for the Advancement of Medical Research. That was an organization that worked extraordinarily hard to help make sure that NIH-funded investigators would be able to use human embryonic stem cells. And an amazing success story for that organization is with the decision of the Supreme Court that they would not take a case about human embryonic stem cells. The organization is actually disbanded, so not many cases where you have a mission, the mission is accomplished, and you can disband. She also served on the president's, she was president of she was on Obama's transition team, and before Pan, she served as the Senate-confirmed director of the U.S. Office of Government Ethics and associate counsel to the president in the White House counsel's office, and she's currently serving on our council, and she keeps us all very ethical. Jan Teller is the Chief Scientific Officer for the Dystonia Medical Research Foundation, where he's been involved in all aspects of the Foundation Science Program. Previously, he was professor at the Brody School of Medicine at East Carolina University and at Case Western Reserve University. I guess we never overlapped at Case. Or maybe we didn't, I don't remember. So what we're going to do is it will be Susan Dickinson, Jan Teller, Susan Axelrod, and then Amy Rick. And I would like us to hear all the presentations. People have been told 10 minutes, and that I will be very strict, maybe 12. And then we'll open it up for comments and questions. So, Susan.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you, Dr. Landis. You said 15 on the phone, but I'll do my best.
I did. I know I did. You know, it's hard.
I just had to point that out. So somebody else slap my wrist before she does, please. That'll be... It's really an honor to be here. We are certainly on the smaller side, but I'm game if you are, and hopefully something from our story will help those of you in the audience today. The Association for Frontotemporal Degeneration was founded 10 years ago in 2002 by a caregiver who had lost her husband to the disease. I think everything you see on this slide may be very familiar to most of you here in the room. We have always been and are still governed by a board of caregivers who have personal experience with the disease. We are also very lucky to be guided by a medical advisory council of experts in the field. Our mission, as you can see, is a very broad one, and it includes supporting our families and their patients, funding and stimulating research, educating professionals about the disease, advocating for increased research dollars and services. And as anyone in the room who works with a rare disease knows, awareness is the key to everything that we want to accomplish. As Dr. Landis mentioned, in the past 5 years, we have grown pretty aggressively. Our budget has more than tripled. We're just at about 1.5 million right now. And the staff has grown from 2 part-time people to 9 full-time people. Much of this growth is the result of strategic partnerships that we have entered into, which is what I most want to share with you today. But with my apologies, you have to understand a little bit about what FTD is in order to understand what led us to the strategic partnerships that we've engaged in. So frontotemporal degeneration is a degenerative brain disease. It's very similar to Alzheimer's in some ways. It's caused by the buildup of toxic proteins that kill the brain cells. It's progressive, there's no therapy, and there's no cure. It's distinct from Alzheimer's, however, in 3 really important ways. The first one is that it is rare. Our prevalence, we don't really know yet, but the current best guess is somewhere between 50 and 60,000 in the US. It's also distinct in terms of the age of onset. We start younger than Alzheimer's. Most of our patients experience their first symptoms in the 40s and 50s. Sadly, some people even as early as the 20s. On average, that's a good 10 or 20 years before the prime risk age for developing Alzheimer's. And then finally, we're distinct from Alzheimer's in the type of symptoms that our patients develop. Patients can first present with symptoms in any one of these 3 areas. They develop language problems, both receptive and expressive. They can develop behavioral problems, and in this area, their personality starts changing. They start using poor judgment, they'll make poor choices, they'll lose their social filters and start behaving inappropriately in public. They may develop severe apathy. One of the first things that most of these patients lose is insight into the fact that anything has changed with themselves. And then the last area of onset of symptoms can be in the movement area. By the end of a patient's life, most people have symptoms from every single one of these buckets. Really quick diagnosis for the movement people is pretty straightforward. For the language people, it's difficult. If they get to a neurologist, usually they're given dementia tests and told that they have Alzheimer's. The behavior people, it's the saddest course, really. It's hard for a lot of families to recognize that there may actually be a medical problem. It's not some sort of midlife crisis where somebody starts to make poor judgment choices. And because these patients do not lose their memory, they test very, very well on those tests. A lot of these patients end up in psychiatry and end up with some sort of bipolar or even schizophrenic kind of diagnosis. So diagnosis is one of our real challenges. You don't need to worry about these, but within each of these areas, there's a variety of clinical syndrome, clinical diagnoses that a person can be diagnosed with. When you look down at pathology, that's not clear either. It is a proteinopathy, but any of our patients, their disease can be caused by any one of 3 major proteins. About 40% of patients have a tauopathy. About 50% their disease is caused by a protein called TDP43. And in the remaining 10%, most of those, we find the protein FUS, or of course there's a small group where there's still the protein is unknown. There is no real concordance between the clinical diagnosis and the pathology causing it. The one exception is in some FTD patients also have motor neuron disease or ALS, and all of these patients have a TDP43 pathology. Most of the progressive supranuclear palsy patients are tauopathies, but everybody else is truly a mess. We don't have biomarkers yet, so there's no way to know in life which protein is causing a patient's disease. We have to wait till autopsy. So I apologize I dragged you all through that, but that leads you to the first way that we discovered some of our first key strategic partnerships. Because tau is one of the 2 main proteins that also causes Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is caused by tau and by beta amyloid. And as I told you, we have maybe 50,000 patients. Well, there are at least 5 million patients in the US today with Alzheimer's. So they've got a lot more going on. So when early on when we discovered this, we went and just started picking up the phone and talking to people in the Alzheimer's world to see what they were doing. And was there some opportunity for us here to start drug discovery in FTD? We were lucky enough to find the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation in New York, who have been tremendously generous partners to us. In 2007, we started a joint FTD drug discovery program. They match our dollars 2 to 1, and they also offered to manage the whole program because at that point we certainly didn't have staff to manage a grant program. And to date, we're in our 7th year of that partnership, and we've awarded over $2 million. TDP43, which I said is 50% of our patients, is the protein found in all ALS patients. So again, this led us to a larger, more well-funded, certainly more well-recognized partner. And to date, we've organized a couple of meetings with the ALS Association and look forward to doing more with them as well. So in general, if you look at the strategies that we've pursued that have stimulated this growth, I'd say the first one is that the biology of our disease defines everything about our disease and about how we work. And I would even actually say it's the current scientific understanding of the biology of our disease that guides those things. It defines our vocabulary, the public perception of our disease, the politics around our disease, the opportunities that we come across, and certainly the partners that we can look to help us take advantage of some of those opportunities. So I just gave you those 2 examples in Alzheimer's and ALS. Another very real example of this is right here at NIH. We always knew that NINDS would be an appropriate home for us where we could look to stimulate joint projects and hopefully for funding. But when you look back at the disease itself, the fact is that those of our families who do get an accurate diagnosis, most in the language or behavior buckets, most of them get diagnosed at one of the major Alzheimer's centers in the US. And those are funded by the National Institute on Aging. So that led us to realize that maybe we could do some partnering with NIA as well as NINDS. And that's actually they work very wonderfully together on our behalf. I'll go into that for a minute. The other thing we realized pretty early on was that we needed to use our mission and our values as a touchstone. One example of a value that makes this case is that we were founded and were informed by the caregiver perspective. So everything we look at, we kind of judge against that value. Is this what our caregivers and our families want us to be spending their money on, want us to be doing? Our mission, likewise, is not something that we just frame and put on the wall, but it's something that we actively grapple with. And as we look at these different opportunities that present themselves, we really look really hard. That mission, as you saw, is incredibly broad. And we have, $1 for every 4 things that we would like to do. So we regularly go through some really, really difficult wrangling over, is this a priority project that we want to engage in? Excuse me. So with understanding those 2 fundamental things, we have been able to partner and leverage pretty strategically. Specifically, one example, back in 2010, we were very pleased to partner with both NINDS and NIA. We had all realized that one key thing that was missing if we were going to advance knowledge on these diseases was having some sort of common repository for data on all these patients, who, as I just said, are seen by different kind of specialists in different places, scattered all across the country because we are a rare disease. So NINDS generously funded a meeting. We kicked in money for the food and helped to get the key experts there. NIA was critical because they already have a database that collects data on every patient that is seen in one of their Alzheimer's centers. I think there are 22 centers right now. So they had a whole infrastructure, and they had all the pieces in place for collecting data on the main places that our patients were being seen. So together at this meeting, we convened about 40 experts and created the common fields for this database. It was herding cats. It didn't go active immediately, of course, but within less than 2 years, we had a database go live to collect data on each of our patients, not only seen at the Alzheimer's centers, but it's also open to clinicians outside of that network, which is much appreciated. And NINDS subsequently also paid for a training session. The other area where we've been very gratified to find willing and generous partners has been more recently. We've created a collaboration called the FTD Treatment Study Group. And that started as just a handful of individuals from our clinical experts, from us, and a couple other peer organizations, as well as some individuals in pharma. And we got together very informally a couple times. Somebody had some money once, so we convened a couple extra experts, and it did start to gain momentum. Toward the end of 2010, we actually formalized the organization into this treatment study group, and we took it under our wing at AFTD. We just expanded and created a scientific director position, so I finally had the wherewithal to feel like we could do a decent job of managing this kind of initiative. And June of 2012, again, we partnered with NINDS, and they helped fund and organize a meeting at which the FDA came to, and we were really pleased to have representatives from 10 different pharma and biotech companies come, which is a pretty remarkable thing because we're just starting to see the very first clinical trials. There's still a whole lot we don't understand fundamentally about the disease. So those are examples of some of the partnerships that we have followed. How am I doing on time? All right. Two really final quick thoughts. It's not the sexy stuff, but something I have learned is you really need to tend to business. We spent a lot of time and effort. We've rewritten our bylaws. We've implemented a system for board recruitment and board training. We have shifted our fiscal year. We've done, it's a lot of boring business kind of stuff, but I've found that the smartest partners and the smartest donors will ask about this kind of thing, and they're looking for an organization that does have smart management. And then finally, it's been the most difficult thing for me personally to learn, but if you've done the homework and the previous things I've said, opportunities will present themselves. There's a lot of luck involved, but sometimes if they're there and you've done your due diligence, this job has taught me that you kind of just have to hold your nose and jump and hope for the best. Thank you.
So I hear several themes, partnerships, taking advantage of opportunities to partner with larger and more experienced organizations, and business. And I saw both Susan Axelrod and Amy Rick nodding their heads yes on those. So, Jen.
Yes, you may certainly speak.
So I was surprised. I have no PowerPoint presentation. And I won't be talking so much about our foundation. And I hope to interest you in dystonia. If you Google dystonia, our foundation will pop up as #1, even in front of Wikipedia, which we are very proud of.
And NINDS, I bet.
Yes. So I believe that you all know everything about dystonia, but I'll just remind you that dystonia is a truly neurological disorder, although exemplifies itself as a muscle, with muscle symptomatology. It's simply muscle twisting, which is provoked by voluntary movements, in brief. This is in contrast to Parkinson's disease or essential tremor, where muscle contractions happen involuntarily, whether you want it or not. In dystonia, really, if you want to reach something, your part of your body or your entire body contracts violently. We have many different forms of dystonia, both genetic and genetically undefined. We can call them sporadic, but we still don't know whether they are really genetic. Some are extremely severe. Some are, you can call them benign, although patients wouldn't say that they are benign, at least in comparison to the very severe forms. And our major accomplishment is that we are talking about dystonia. The dystonia is recognized as a true, legitimate disease. When our foundation started as a family business in 1976, dystonia was unknown even among neurologists. Diagnosis was essentially impossible. To this day, it's very tragic that on average, it takes from 8 to 12 years to properly diagnose people, because initially, essentially, ordinary doctors think that this is something, maybe you ate something, maybe you are nervous, maybe something happens to you, come back in 3 months. And it drags on and on and on. In the history of our foundation, we have some spectacular successes, and I'm not afraid to use this word success. Thanks to funding by DMRF, which started in actually mid-80s, there was recognition that some of the most severe forms of dystonia actually are genetic, and families were identified. And this went back to the definition of dystonia, which was made in 1911 in Germany. And for almost 80 years, it was kind of forgotten. And a team of doctors consisting of Susan Bressman in New York and Sandra Brakefield and Laurie Ozelius at that time, both at Harvard, discovered the very first gene for dystonia called DYT1. This happened was finalized in 1997. Why we call this a great success? First of all, the whole process of gene discovery was really exemplary. Identification of affected families, collaboration between clinicians and geneticists. And what is happening now, during a session, before this one, we had this conversation about lack of success when you have a gene in hand and you cannot really understand the disease and you cannot really develop any treatment. And unfortunately, this is still happening for DYT1. We have known this gene for 16 years, and we have no clue even about the function of the protein encoded by this gene. But the success lies in a completely different area. People who are affected by DYT1, they have only one allele affected, one copy out of 2. Which means when they want children, they have 50% of chance passing this mutated gene onto their children. So what happened with the knowledge of the whole mechanism, what is now possible is actually to select a proper healthy embryo and through in vitro fertilization conceive a child which is free of DYT1 mutation, although at least one of the parents carries this mutation. And right now we have 4 children born which are free of DYT1 mutation from patients who are carriers of and actually are affected by the disease. So I call this a great success, although this cannot be applied to everyone, especially those who are still alive and were born with the mutation. Our other successes are probably numerous, and I don't want to flex my muscle here too much. We are very proud to be notorious collaborators in a very good meaning of the word, and NINDS is one of the prime examples. We've had a phenomenal relationship with the NINDS over the years in many different dimensions in terms of organizing the joint workshops, in getting advice, in informing each other about what is really happening in the dystonia field and coordinating our funding, because obviously I assume that you understand that we fund science as well. One of the results of this long-term collaboration was really establishment of the Dystonia Coalition, which is a network of movement disorder centers and clinicians. And this was, we call this the Dystonia Coalition, but technically it's a grant from jointly funded by the Office of Rare Disease Research and NINDS. It's now in its 5th year, and we hope to renew this. And really, this established a first ever, I would say, global, or at least international network of movement disorders. Again, if we understand that we have probably less than 300,000 people affected by dystonia in the US, and probably less in other countries, smaller countries, then it's a major effort to really coordinate and gather knowledge about natural history of dystonia and establish all the criteria, understanding that this is a disorder which is still being diagnosed by visual inspection. The major thing exchanged between clinicians is a video recording of a patient. There are no biomarkers. The coalition not only established a network of clinicians, but also involved essentially all the foundations involved in dystonia research, and as I said, is international. We are extremely proud of it, and I believe that we will get this coalition, the grant renewed for next 5 years to build on our successes so far. There was a comment here that a foundation like ours should deal with science, with business aspects, and with collaboration, interaction with different constituencies and partnerships, establishing partnerships. And this is all true, and it really tells the whole story, that we are not just a research foundation, as it says in our name, but we interact with patients. We go to the Hill every year to lobby for dystonia and other movement disorders. So this becomes obviously very, very complicated and very complex. But we are glad to be. I would steal the line from the NIH magazine I picked up here, which is called the NIH Catalyst. We really like to be catalysts. We cannot really discover things on our own at the foundation, but we can catalyze those things either through funding or through our partnership work. And I want to finish with a quote from probably the most famous pharmacologist ever, Sir James Black, who established certain criteria for successful drug development. And 4 or 5 of them were very technical. That this has to be a small molecule, has to penetrate tissues, has to be non-toxic, and so forth. But the last principle was extremely surprising, coming from a hardcore pharmacologist. It says a drug being developed needs a champion. And so it goes for a disease. And we want to be champions, and I hope that every one of you here is a champion for a specific cause and for a specific disease. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So tomorrow, I think Steve Groff from National Center for Advancing Translational Science will be talking about the Rare Disease Consortia. I know that there are a number of neurological disorders who have been fortunate enough to get these consortial grants, and be interesting if some of you who have had them or haven't had them but think maybe you'd like to ask him some questions about the size of the program and the commitment of NCATS to that. But, okay, Susan.
Hi, thank you for inviting me here, and I'm a little bit, I don't want to deny any of the successes that we may have had, but I think probably all of us in this room feel like we will not have been successful until we have defeated these diseases that we're all here to fight against. So having said that, I am representing CURE, Citizens United for Research in Epilepsy. I'm sure you've all heard of epilepsy, unlike some of these other more rare diseases. Epilepsy, you're diagnosed with epilepsy when you have had 2 or more seizures, and a seizure is abnormal neuronal activity. This has been around since biblical times. Hippocrates wrote about epilepsy, and it sounds relatively simple put in those terms, but it's incredibly complex, and I think sort of interestingly, as science advances, it even becomes more complex. I've been intrigued lately that some of the federal agencies, including the NINDS, have started calling it the epilepsies, which I think is really accurate because we're dealing with many, many different syndromes, many types, many causes. We have children, you have a huge number of kids who are impacted, equal number of senior citizens or a growing number of senior citizens who are impacted. We have genetic causes, and we have acquired causes like stroke, tumor, traumatic brain injury. And we have amazingly probably common comorbidities with many of the diseases that you're all representing here today. So epilepsy taken as a whole, or the epilepsies, are incredibly common. An Institute of Medicine report just recently said that 1 in 26 Americans will develop epilepsy in their lifetime. That's a huge public health problem. We have 3 million Americans in the United States with epilepsy, 65 million worldwide. Tens of thousands of lives, we don't really have an accurate figure, are lost each year to epilepsy or to seizure-related causes. And 30% at least of patients do not have control of their seizures. So there's a huge unmet need. I got into this because of my daughter in 1981. I went into her bedroom to find her lying in her crib, blue and limp. I put to bed what I thought was a perfectly healthy baby and thought she had actually died at that point. She then went into a seizure. I'd never seen a seizure except maybe in some TV programs or something, and had no idea what was going on, rushed her to the emergency room. And with that first onset, she entered the world of refractory epilepsy. She had 3 seizures while we were waiting to be seen. She was hospitalized for a month, came home on 3 different drugs, and continued to have about 8 seizures a day. So we went through the next 18 years of her life trying different drugs, different diets, brain surgeries, vagal nerve stimulation, and none of them were effective. She continued to have clusters of seizures that were life-threatening and that have left her damaged in terms of her cognitive skills and her ability to live independently. Having said that, the hope part of my story is that 13 years ago, she responded to a new medication that had just been put on the market. She was in really, really bad shape at the time. In fact, in the hospital on IV with all sorts of medications flowing into her, and her doctor, for the first time ever, looked at me and said, "I don't think I can put anything else into her body safely." We introduced this drug and the seizures stopped, and she's not had a seizure in 13 years. And what that has done for her life, what that's done to free me up to pursue this, her ability to just grow, even at the age of 32, we see constant improvement in her cognition. And so I think that should give us all hope that there can be answers. For her, she defied all odds. The chance of this drug working for her was next to nothing. So in 1998, with the energy and passion, which only comes, I think, from other parents, I founded CURE around my kitchen table. And we had no business plan. We had maybe no business doing this. My husband told me that. But it was something that just had to be done. These were other moms I had worked with running support groups for patients. And at a certain point, we thought we can't continue to accept the status quo. We cannot continue not thinking in any way that any of the work we did would help our children. But there was this void in this community of people screaming for research and demanding answers. And instead, people were just sort of had developed this complacency, and people weren't talking about epilepsy. And so we came together And really, it was our passion that drove us. We had a singular focus on research, and I know you talked about learning to say no to things. We've said no to a lot of things, a lot of needs of patients with epilepsy that are so compelling, and we know from having lived with it are so important. But we've really kept our focus on driving the research, being a catalyst, to borrow that phrase, for research wherever we can find it that will help. We encourage research that is outside the box, going along with that, not accepting the status quo. We don't want the same old stuff. We really want to start looking at disease modification rather than just symptom control, and have really driven that agenda. At this point, 14 years later, we've funded 150 grants worldwide. We've raised $26 million for research. That's working our tails off. It's not a whole lot of money when it comes to research, but it's been great. We've had people sort of joining our cause from around the country. We have developed our first team. One of the things we're most proud of in the last year, yet to be determined how successful it will be, but we convened a group of scientists, and we are doing our first ever team science. We have 8 investigators, teams of investigators who have come together to look at the problem of infantile spasms, a rare syndrome with devastating consequences. And we've put this team together to work together, to collaborate, to share ideas, to think outside the box. And so far, it's very energizing, and it seems to be going really well. We're going to have metrics these people are going to have to meet. We're going to direct the science to the extent that science can be directed. So we're trying new things. 1/3 of our grantees have gone on to get NIH funding, which we're very proud of. We've had a couple of success stories. One thing I think I've learned is that science is painfully slow, especially if you're watching your child have seizure after seizure or worse. But we've had a few breakthroughs lately. Scott Baraban at the University of California, San Francisco, with his zebrafish, you saw some zebrafish earlier, discovered that he can do some high throughput screening and discover some therapies. In particular, he found an antihistamine that may be very effective for a particular syndrome called Dravet's syndrome, which is very exciting. We funded Peter Crino, who had discovered, and there was some conversation about this earlier, he had discovered HPV, the major cause of cervical cancer in a lot of resected brain tissue. That has led to some really exciting results, and I understand the NIH, the NINDS, and maybe the Cancer Institute are going to be going forward and looking at that. And Scott as well got a Eureka Award from the NIH. And in addition to those things, it's always hard to tell a patient or a patient's loved one, I think, that we have successes because we've had more NIH grants or we've published from our research. But you want success that's going to actually impact the lives, and that's one of, I think, our biggest struggles is being able to say, keep investing, keep believing, keep hoping, because these things will come to fruition. We've opened up new areas of research. One of our grantees, Anna Maria Vizzani in Italy, was one of the first to look at the role of the inflammatory process in epilepsy. And that's now become a field that more people are looking into. So today the organizers asked me to speak about the role of scientists, how we brought them in to CURE, how the importance that they have to us. We have over 300 people who volunteer to review grants for CURE. We have a revolving door of really engaged scientific advisors that serve on an advisory board for us. And I think that's been one of the greatest gifts for me personally, is working with these individuals. The first thing after we formed our board, when we started CURE, was to come to an American Epilepsy Society meeting and just literally start hunting people down in the hallways and asking them if they would serve on our scientific advisory board. Shockingly, they almost all said yes. And I really, to this day, don't quite know why. But they did. We were unknown. We were unproven. And I think a lot about it. And I wonder, to some degree, whether the void that we were feeling wasn't also felt by them. And I think maybe it really is a two-way street, and needs to be a two-way street between lay people and advocates and scientists. I think that obviously there's no way that we could have done what we're doing without them, but I think that we have really filled some void for them, and I think that the patient-scientist relationship is critical to steering science in the right direction toward improving and transforming patients' lives. I think it energizes us all. I think that, you know, we have had so many opportunities to go into to basic researchers' offices, or be at meetings with them and educate them about what this disease is like, and try to make certain that they know that what they're doing is the most important work in the world to us. I think that many people enter science for all the right reasons, but they don't really necessarily understand the disease. We've had people serve on our scientific advisory board who have been in the field for a while, who have thanked us for reminding them of why they went into the field, keeping their eye on the prize, the patient. And so I think that's critically important. And like I said, I think it's been, for me personally, one of the most rewarding things about doing this. I also think we have special programs to bring young investigators into the field. And I think that if we can interact with them at the same sort of level, communicate the same kind of thing, that we will instill in them that focus that I think is so important to advancing science in the right direction. So what I would recommend to all of you, if you have not developed your own scientific team, is to seek their help. I think scientists are so ready to help and so eager to help, and make sure that you get diverse perspectives. We've tried really hard to even bring in people from outside epilepsy to counsel us and to review grants, because we think their perspectives could really enhance what we're doing. We have really focused a lot of our efforts on bringing multidisciplinary efforts together, both in our grants but also in our review process. Rotate the people that you are getting advice from and that you're getting reviews from frequently, so you're getting fresh opinions and you're getting new opinions. And encourage out-of-the-box thinking. That's sometimes hard to do. I mean, we are trying at this point, one of our frustrations, quite honestly, with our scientific advisory board has been that we've gotten so sometimes into the nitty-gritty of grant review with them that we aren't getting bigger pictures. So we're really trying to restructure starting this year and use them more. We have now are starting to build our own internal science team, so we're capable of doing this, using them more as blue sky. What would you do? What do you think about our program? Where could we do something differently? Where have we gone wrong? What could we do in the future? And encourage risk-taking. I know it's a hard thing to do. This money that we raise is somebody else's money. We're stewards of that money. But if we don't, as nonprofits, take the risks that are going to lead to great discoveries, I think the NIH is not necessarily in a position to be able to do that. So we can open doors for people to take chances. And beyond that, I just want to say I'm looking out in the room and seeing other members of Vision 2020, which is a collaboration of epilepsy groups that have come together around specific syndromes. And there's been great synergy in that organization. We came together and funded and worked together on an Institute of Medicine report on the public health impact of epilepsy. And that was a great experience, and I think we all learned a lot about each other, and we'll continue that work together. We have done a little bit of work with the Autism Speaks people, trying to understand the comorbidities between autism and epilepsy. And so I think constantly to be looking for those opportunities to engage other organizations, to learn from each other, as we are all doing here at this meeting, is a great lesson for all of us.
Amy.
I don't know where my slides are.
Thank you, Story, and thank you to everyone for having me here today. I'm the CEO of the Parkinson's Action Network. Parkinson's disease, for those of you who are not familiar, is it's classified as a movement disorder, although there are significant non-motor cognitive impacts of the disease as well as the motor symptoms. We believe about 1 million people in the country have Parkinson's disease, although we don't really have good data about Parkinson's disease, how many people in the country have it. Parkinson's disease results from the death of the dopamine-producing neurons in the brain dying. There's a strong belief that you have had Parkinson's disease for 15, 20, even many more years before you're initially diagnosed with Parkinson's. It's a clinical diagnosis. There really is nothing that we have no biomarkers, nothing to really accurately diagnose Parkinson's disease. And because there's no biomarker, it certainly makes research for potential therapies a little more difficult. We do have symptomatic therapies that work fairly well for the first 5 to 8 years. And then after that, the therapies stop working as well, and they have their own impacts, such as dyskinesia. So it is a disease that if one gets to the end stage is really quite dreadful, and quite frankly, people die from asphyxiation still. And we have nothing at the moment that we can use to modify the disease. So as we've all started with our terrifying scenarios with our diseases. What I'm going to talk about today is different organizational structures with organizations that I've been involved with along the theme of success stories, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about how organizations can be structured to get the most out of the time and money that you're putting into it, which, as Susan so accurately said, we're stewards of other people's money. PAN was created. PAN is a very unique organization in Washington, D.C. First of all, we only do federal policy issues. We work exclusively on policy, meaning congressional or administration issues that impact the Parkinson's disease community. There's other organizations that only do policy, but what makes PAN really unique is that we represent the entire Parkinson's disease community. There are 5 to 6 other national Parkinson's organizations, and some focus on research exclusively, some on services, and some on a combination, and some have clinical centers, but none of them do policy or advocacy. They all look to PAN, our organization, for work on federal policy issues. As far as I know, there is no other large disease community that has been able to come together in that way and say, in this one area, we are going to speak with one voice out of one organization. We are a 501c3 educational charity, so we have to be careful, and that's fine. It's not hard for us to make sure that our education and outreach activities are high enough so that under IRS rules, we're not a lobbying organization. You want to be a 501c3, both for the credibility of your message on Capitol Hill and in the administration, as well as for that beloved tax deduction for donations. It matters. We have a staff of 12 located in DC, an annual budget of about $2.2 million. The vision for speaking for one voice as a disease community was actually a vision created by our founder about 20 years ago. Her experience was simply that people would go on Capitol Hill, and if you had one Parkinson's organization with an appointment with a member at 1 o'clock and they said, we need this, and someone else has an appointment at 3 o'clock and they say, we need this, even if they're quite similar but different, a meeting with a member of Congress, your ask has to be pretty simple and straightforward. If they were at all different, you're pretty much dismissed. And it was our founders, and I understand that. If you as a community can't get together and figure out what it is you think we should do for you, then why am I going to spend time figuring it out for you? So that was our founders' vision. It remained a vision for a while. But over the last 10 or 15 years, we've really been able to pull it together as the structure of the organization. The CEOs of 4 of the national Parkinson's organizations, the Michael J. Fox Foundation, the Parkinson's Disease Foundation, which has people here today, the National Parkinson Foundation, and the Parkinson Alliance Unity Walk, all sit on our board of directors. And that is how they have input with PAN. What is important to understand as an organizational structure, though, and makes us very, very unique, is we are not just a coalition of the 4 national organizations. They fund us. Together, they give about 30% of our funding. We raise the other 70%. But the CEOs of the other large national Parkinson's disease organizations have one vote on our board of directors, just like our volunteer member boards, our grassroots representative board of directors. We're a 15-member board. And collectively, even if this would never happen, we wouldn't let this happen, but even if the 4 of them said, whatever direction PAN is choosing to go in is a terrible idea, and voted against it, and the other 11 volunteer board members voted for it, they wouldn't get their way. Believe me, we'd never let that happen. But just to give you a sense, we're an independent organization. And I will tell you, talking about some of the pros from that, it has given the Parkinson's community a single advocacy voice that, in my opinion, as I've been watching this over the years, really enhances the strength of our message on Capitol Hill and in the administration, and allows us to be a point for information for the Hill sometimes when they want to get feedback from a disease community. And quite frankly, it's one phone call to reach out to the entire Parkinson's disease community. And it is my belief that homework that we did for the coordination that we believe is so important, that we saw the greater good of this, has allowed us to be more effective when we communicate externally. It's also a single advocacy voice at NIH, at NINDS, quite frankly. If it's an issue that has to do more with policy rather than science, NINDS, I think, has been appreciated that there's kind of a one-stop shop and you don't have to go to 10 different organizations.
It's a much louder voice.
Yes, definitely is. And she doesn't just mean me, by the way.
Founder, for example, had a very loud.
Yes, she did. But I also believe it has added to, in addition to the loudness and strength of our voice, to the credibility of our voice, because even though PAN, when we're up on the Hill, we're representing PAN, which is an organization, we are not just representing one of the 4 organizations that support us. We're not there. We have more of a presence of not self-interest. We are here on behalf of the whole community. People with Parkinson's, grassroots leaders, donors, researchers, the other PD orgs, clinicians, caregivers, and e-advocates, who are the people who advocate and lobby for us, the volunteers on Capitol Hill. So I have no doubt that this structure is much more effective for disease communities that have more than one organization. But there are challenges to it, and I want to share those with you. Most of them are financial, but not all of them. We are not fully funded by the other Parkinson's disease organizations. As I said, they fund us about 30%, and we have to raise the other 70%. But because of our unique structure, we are unwritten rules somewhat prohibited from competing with the other organizations in terms of fundraising. They already fund us. So it handcuffs us a little bit, a little less than now than it used to. And that can be a challenge because you have some large donors who sit on our board. You don't want to make them mad and go out and compete with them in fundraising. But on the other hand, they only give us 30% of our funding. We need to raise 70%. So there's a little bit of a tug there. And I'll be quite frank with you, it's hard to fundraise on policy. policy. The average charitable donor is more immediately drawn, and I totally get this, immediately drawn to donating to an organization that provides services or funds research, something you can really grab hold of. And it takes someone who funny, a lot of our donors are in the DC area. It definitely takes someone who's thought a little bit about the role of Congress, the administration, NIH leadership, in terms of the role of policy and the huge impact that has on research. But you sometimes have to connect the dots for people. The fact that the work we do leverages millions of dollars of disease research money is not as immediately intuitive to people. And I will say another con, just if we're laying our cards out on the table here about different structures and the impact, is that it means in terms of the Washington world, PAN does really represent the whole community. But for our 4 affiliated organizations who give us a great deal of money, they are not represented as much in DC, and they probably don't get their name out there quite as much as they would otherwise, because when we're on the Hill, we're PAN, and you have to look at our business card carefully to see that that represents a whole bunch of people. So just being honest with you about the pros and cons, I still think ultimately our community really values the organization of PAN, and that our primary mission is the community as a whole, not the needs and goals of any single organization. And whenever we struggle with, is this the right structure, we always come back to that we are meeting the needs of the community, and that's the most important thing. And that's why we stick with it this way. But as with everything in life, there are pros and cons. I'm going to talk too about 2 other organizations. Am I okay time-wise? So, 2 other organizations that I am involved with or have been involved with very different organizational structures, just to give you something to think about. The first one, Story mentioned, CAMR, the Coalition for the Advancement of Medical Research. CAMR was founded in 2000. By patient groups. PAN was one of the founding organizations. I wasn't involved with PAN at the time. Research institutions, Johns Hopkins, Harvard, Columbia were founding institutions, Wisconsin, of course, at the time, as well as other patient groups and societies of researchers. And what's interesting is in 2000, those groups, those different kinds, really didn't talk to each other very much. We sit here and talk in our earlier session about how researchers need to talk to patient groups more and all that. But 13 years ago, there was even less communication going on. But CAMR was founded because each of those pockets of people interested in the issue of human embryonic stem cell research reacted to President Bush's policy, if you recall, in August of 2001, actually, so it was before the policy, but all those organizations were concerned about federal funding for human embryonic stem cell research. What made CAMR very unique is that I've always called it a one-trick pony. It was focused on one issue, and that Susan Dickinson had talked about, the power of saying no. Over the years, CAMR, which focused exclusively on policy issues regarding federal funding for stem cell research, but it really became human embryonic almost exclusively. CAMR is very successful, very strong team of representatives from the about 100 member organizations would be asked, will you take on this kind of related issue? And maybe you could do work on an issue that's so close, wouldn't you guys take it on? And we said no, because we wanted to focus well on the one issue that was so important to all the disease groups and all the institutions that were members of CAMR. And quite frankly, on a lot of issues like research funding, certain research funding issues, state funding for research. So these different groups may have very different opinions on some other issues, and we were able to keep this relationship strong and alive because it was one issue that we focused on. Story mentioned, gave away the end of the story. We closed, actually, as of July 1, 2013. CAMR closed as an organization because we believe we have reached the point where federal funding for human embryonic stem cell research is mostly secure. And one of the lessons we've learned is that you can't keep a coalition going and effective kind of at the ready. That doesn't work. Nobody would want to fund us. They're not interested in our issue right now. They'd be interested in the issue if it arose again, but you can't keep membership going saying, just in case. It's too precious. All of our time and money is too precious. So we made the tough decision, but it was, I'm quite clear it was the right one, to close our books and consciously reach out to another organization that works on regenerative medicine issues. And we gave them our remaining money in the bank, which was about $200,000. And we gave them the money and said, we need a commitment from you that if human embryonic stem cell research is ever threatened again in terms of federal funding, that you will pick up the mantle, and of course all of us would be there to help. So that's just an example of a different way, a coalition. You don't have to do, and Vision 2020 I think was a little bit of it like that too. You don't have to work on everything together, but if you can pull the community together, however you define community, on one issue, it's remarkable how that focus can really help you accomplish what you need. The third and CAMR, by the way, I have been on the board, I guess, for 10 years, and then I served 2 terms as the president, including the term during when the NIH guidelines came out and when President Obama was elected and the guidelines came out, and then for closing it. So two significant times. The third organization I want to talk about is the American Brain Coalition, and that's an organization that is still evolving. It's a relatively young organization, and that is a coalition, as its name indicates, of organizations that are interested in brain diseases. The executive director of the American Brain Coalition, Katie Sales, right there, Katie.
Stand up, Katie.
And I have been on the board of ABC for a while. ABC is not disease specific at all, but most of the members are disease specific. And it is focused, again, exclusively on policy issues that are relevant to disease organizations. And I know there's some organizations in the room here who belong to ABC. One of the things, of course, that we are learning over the years is that disease specific advocacy, this is quite a generalization, so what I'm about to say doesn't always apply, but disease-specific advocacy is more and more falls on deaf ears, and promoting science that has, first, as we learn in the science, as we heard about in earlier talks, that the science is so related from disease to disease. Some of our disease definitions are very outdated. And in addition, the policy issues are very rarely disease specific. And when they are, they sometimes fall on deaf ears because it seems so, quite frankly, seems so self-interested and on the rising tide theory. And so ABC really is focused on what are the common issues we have in all the brain diseases, and can we be more, simple theme, it's not rocket science, can we be more effective together than we are apart? I will tell you that I have been hugely impressed by how compelling the existence of this coalition has been. The White House, when they had learned recently on a couple issues that there's a coalition that exists for the brain diseases, just like our experience with Parkinson's, but that's only one disease, that there's a coalition that exists for the brain diseases, that there's one-stop shop, they get really excited that they can reach out to one organization, reach out to Katie, and that we can do the work to pull together the relevant organizations. And I've seen the same thing on Capitol Hill. A neuroscience caucus was started. Katie worked hard on that. And it has been, in the years that I've been doing healthcare policy, the immediate openness and reaction to ABC has really impressed me, that the value that busy people can think that there's a group that's already done the work to find our common issues and they can have a one-stop shop. It's very compelling. So it's an open door, I think, for ABC to be much more successful as an organization, that each of us, let's say it had 50 members, then the 50 members could be individually by making the same phone calls. So clearly there is a need for a coalition like this, like ABC. But as I said, it's still growing and evolving. And I think last year at the Nonprofit Forum, I made a pitch for ABC as well. But there are challenges to a coalition like ABC. Again, remember I said ABC does primarily education, but primarily policy work. And for the large organizations, PAN already does. We have a full policy shop. Many of the people are here today. The Alzheimer's Association is a good example. They have a big policy shop, DC office. Epilepsy Foundation, they have a big policy shop. So there isn't as much compelling the large organizations to join an organization like ABC. They already have large grassroots. They already have full-time policy staff, probably more than one, maybe 3, 4, 5. So the need for an organization like ABC is not as great for a large organization as it is for some other organizations that are represented in a room that are smaller and actually can't afford to have full-time or even part-time policy staff. So as a board of ABC, we've spent a lot of time talking about, are we really primarily there to meet the needs of the smaller organizations? We do wish everyone would get together and effectively advocate with one voice, but are we really filling a void that the smaller organizations can't fill because they can't afford to have their own policy shops? And that may very well be the case, but we don't want to create a divide between the large organizations and the small organizations. And quite frankly, as an organization, what the small organizations can afford to pay to ABC for membership fees are not enough to keep an organization going. So both for the unity of our message as well as practical finances, we really have to be an organization of large and small, but we're still struggling with what the incentives are for the large organization to be heavily involved. So I hope this is what you wanted, some pros and cons of kind of nonprofit organizations and how working together can help us, but the benefits are great, but there's usually a few bumps in the road. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So I would just like to put in a plug for coalitions of organizations. It's been wonderful working with PAN, and I think the Parkinson's research community has benefited from PAN as a voice that works on Parkinson's issues. And I would say that I think there have been some pretty extraordinary accomplishments from the Vision 2020 group in epilepsy. I'm told that they now share applications and review of applications and decide how they're going to spend their money, which makes it much more convenient and for the investigators and to make sure that the money gets spent in the best possible way. And I know in some cases there's a tendency for organizations that work on the same disease to feel a bit competitive in terms of who they raise money from and what their accomplishments will be. But there are certainly benefits if you can rise above that to define a set of activities that you're willing to work on. So I'd like to open this up for comments, questions. Don't know if there are any to start with. Yes.
I'm really interested in the team science approach, and I'd like to bring Mark up. That seems like a great way.
Mike is coming because we have people, I hope we have people watching the webcast.
Team science approach seems like a great way to be more focused in what you're funding while also sort of leveraging the principles of cooperation and collaboration. So I wanted to hear more just about beginning that, launching that, what it took in terms of your own resources and kind of what that's looking like right now.
Yeah, well, I think I mentioned we're just about a year into it, so I actually asked our scientific team if we were ready to declare anything one way or the other, and we're not quite yet. But the way we came together was we were sort of tired of just accepting sort of investigator-initiated awards or grants in whatever area an investigator was interested in that met our mission generally of trying to find a cure for epilepsy. But really wanted to just give this a try in terms of driving science. We looked for an area that we thought was ripe for discovery that was, to those of us in the organization, needed to be very compelling. This is a serious epilepsy with lifelong devastating implications. And the scientific team, we met for 2 days, and they just kept coming back to infantile spasms as a low-hanging fruit, something that really we could reach some accomplishments in. And so then we decided on a budget. We're investing about $1 million a year in this. Pretty much committed to 3 years, although we could pull that from anybody if they're not being a good team player or not meeting their what we expect of them. And we feel really lucky that we're at a point where we now have 2.5 internal science people that work for CURE. And so they, because I can't evaluate sort of how that's going, but they are on conference calls with them, they're interacting with them all the time to see how it's going, to try to redirect if there's a problem. So we're really excited about it, but and happy to talk to you more about it.
So I would say the experiment that's been going on probably the longest is the Myelin Repair Foundation, which works on repair after MS. And they've had team science going, and their requirements about you have to share your data before it's published, you have to come to meetings, you have to trade postdocs. So that website is well worth looking at. And I know the guy who used to run it, he may still be running at Bromley, is more than happy to talk to you about the pros and cons. Question? Yeah. Okay, Ron.
First of all, wonderfully compelling and moving presentations from all four of you, and congratulations on wonderful accomplishments for all four. I have a question about, several of you mentioned congressional advocacy, and I know PAN, for example, spends all of its time on advocacy for policy, congressional and administration, as you said, Amy. I'm wondering about the apparent tension between advocacy for, as you said, disease-specific advocacy falls on deaf ears largely. But there seems to be some tension between disease-specific policy advocacy, which can play to great effect, and the tension between that and disease-specific appropriations advocacy and versus advocacy for the NIH budget or advocacy for the FDA budget. Wondering how you would differentiate between your policy work and any appropriations work in that regard.
That's a good question. That's too good, actually, Ron. Sorry. You're absolutely right that disease-specific appropriations is, with some exceptions, not particularly well received right now, and I think everyone in the room kind of gets that. Disease-specific, most policy issues that we approach are not disease-specific in the sense that we go and say that we want a special rule for Medicare therapy, Medicare-funded therapy, that's only for Parkinson's, and it's not for MS, and we would never, well, first off, I personally would never run an organization that would do that, because that's not a good thing to do. But in addition, it doesn't make sense. So I would say that our policy-specific advocacy, which does, I think you're absolutely right, it's very astute, does tend to use the Parkinson's word more or the epilepsy word more when they're up there, is because you're up there often saying, are you aware that this legislation you're working on or this rule you're working on is actually going to have this very negative impact on our community? So what we're bringing in that advocacy is the expertise to, let's face it, staff on the Hill or people in the administration, they can't be familiar with the details of every single disease. That's just not possible. So often what you're bringing is advocacy to educate them about why what they're proposing would have a negative impact on Parkinson's. But I'll tell you, quite frankly, and Jennifer, our policy director, I hope would agree with this, we would say Parkinson's, but then say, and we're not the only one. When we are proposing outside of appropriations, when we are actually proposing, there's a lot of issues right now in terms of how long it takes for a neurology therapy to go through the development pipeline. It takes longer than most other disease areas, which there's less incentive than for industry to get involved in that area. So we're having conversations on the Hill about, are there incentives you can do to incentivize industry to get back into therapy development in the neurology area. We will always advocate with Parkinson's disease examples, but we'd be dead on arrival if we stopped there. There's never going to be a change to FDA data exclusivity rules or heaven knows patent laws just for Parkinson's, and I'd be embarrassed to ask for that. But so we use the Parkinson's examples, but to be good advocates, we have to to educate ourselves about the much larger community and explain that on that issue, we're really there representing a lot of other people, and if they're interested, they should go talk to those communities too, or have a coalition.
Yeah.
So I'd be interested, Jan, in what the role of your group was in pulling together the people who applied for the Rare Disease Consortium grant. And was your organization the applicant, or did you organize people to be the applicant?
I'm not sure whether I can say the whole truth, but
Makes it even more interesting.
there were a lot of delicate discussions at different levels, and convincing. And I guess at our foundations, there's an anecdote that I actually I caught one of the later on principal investigators at an airport. And we had a beer, and I actually convinced him that he needs to be part of it, because paradoxically, clinical scientists were the least willing actually to make a commitment, because it was that, I don't know, what I'm going to get out of this, or is this really something which will fail in a year or two? And we kept sending a very strong message that we are behind this. And we were part of it. I believe this is you probably know more about that, or can tell us more about that, that this is a completely new way of integrating foundations, contributions and work in such a big grant. So we are formally part of the grant. We are actually, as a foundation, a so-called administrative center. So we manage some important stuff for the coalition as well. And we are not the only foundation. The whole idea was to really unite various. We are the biggest foundation, but there are many much smaller foundations, and sort of to get them on board. And again, speak with one voice. We heard this phrase here, which is extremely important. And I understand, I guess this message was coming also from NINDS, that if we are dealing with 600 diseases, if we multiply this by 10, 15 foundations per disease, and now we are supposed to talk with everyone, that's absolutely crazy. So as much as we want to be kind of separate individual, if we want to compete in a healthy way, that's why you have so many universities and labs and so forth. We have to find a common ground for collaboration, and you will be surprised, and I can give you many examples, that people who were fierce competitors, when they saw that there's a mutual benefit, they would jump into that.
The reason I'm emphasizing the Rare Disease Consortia a little bit is because they're about to recompete. And so it's, as you said, there are opportunities for new groups to come together, and foundations can certainly play a major role in pushing the groups together to apply. Other questions? Okay. Well, great. Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation.